What is it in the architect's covenant with the remnant that makes it truly unbreakable? The question echoed in the silent chambers of Ilara's mind, a counter-rhythm to the low, weary hum of the Ark's life support. For 400 cycles, the Starseeker had been their home, their prison, their universe, a colossal vessel carrying the last vestiges of humanity across the star-strewn abyss. They were the remnant of terror, the exiles, a people born in the void, living on fading stories and the light of a star they had never seen. Ethel, the sanctuary, the promised world. But promises felt thin in the recycled air of the ship. The hydroponic farms were yielding less each cycle, their nutrient solution growing weaker. The great fusion core, the heart of their world, sputtered with increasing frequency, plunging entire sectors into terrifying temporary darkness. Fear, once a whisper, was now a constant, low-grade fever, infecting the 300,000 souls aboard. They were a great nation, as the Covenant had promised, but they felt like a dying one. Ilara, as keeper of the archives, was the custodian of their past. Her domain was a vault of crystal data slates, holding the memories and histories of a world none of them remembered. It was her duty to preserve the story, but lately her duty felt like a lie. How could she speak of a promised destination when their journey was falling apart? Her console chimed, a soft, insistent tone, a priority message from Jax, the head engineer, and a rising voice on the ship's council. She accepted the comms link, his holographic image flickering to life before her, sharp, pragmatic, his face etched with the worry of a man who knew exactly how close their systems were to cascading failure. Ilara, he began, dispensing with pleasantries. The council convenes in one rotation. We're discussing a course correction. The Alcyone Nebula has a cluster of ice-rich asteroids. We can replenish our water and hydrogen reserves. It's a detour. A significant one, but it's a tangible solution. A detour away from Ethel, Ilara stated. It wasn't a question. Ethel is a myth on a star chart, Ilara. Jax's voice was strained, the frustration barely veiled. Ice and hydrogen are real. They will keep us alive. This blind faith in the architect's covenant, it's going to kill us. We need to rely on ourselves, on what we can see and touch, not on ancient promises made to a man who has been dust for millennia. The covenant is the reason we exist, Jax. It is our entire purpose. Our purpose is to survive, he shot back, his hologram crackling with the intensity of his words. What good is a promise if we're all dead before we arrive? The architect has been silent for centuries. It's time we navigated by our own light. The transmission ended, leaving Ilara in a silence that was heavier than before. Jax's words were venomous, yet they resonated with the secret, traitorous doubts in her own heart. Was the covenant nothing more than a beautiful story, a cosmic folk tale to keep a dying people from despair? The question burned within her. What makes it unbreakable? Or was it in fact already broken, its fragments scattered like dust in their wake? Driven by a desperate need for an answer, she turned to the Prime Archive, the most sacred and protected data slate in the vault. It contained the logs of Kylan, the first exile, the progenitor of their people, the man who first received the covenant. Her fingers, trembling slightly, keyed in the authorization codes. The crystal slab glowed, projecting a column of soft light into the air, filled with swirling text and ghost-like images from a time long past. She scrolled past the records of Terra's fall, the cataclysm that had scorched their home world and sent the first generation fleeing into the black. She found the entry she was looking for, the Genesis Forge. Kalen's voice, a synthesized reconstruction from his written logs, filled the chamber. It was a voice thick with despair. He had led his small, broken band of survivors away from the ruins, guided only by a whispering presence in his mind, the architect. But years had passed. His wife, Sarai, was barren. His people were few, their hope dwindling. He was an old man chasing a dream across an unforgiving cosmos. "O sovereign architect," Kalen's recorded words lamented, "what can you give me? I remain childless, and my legacy will pass to another. You brought me out from the ashes of terror, but for what? You promised me a nation, a sanctuary, but I see only the endless void and the faces of a dying people." The architect's response was not in words, but in a command. a command that defied all logic. Kalen was to take the most precious components they had, salvaged the core plating for a new ship, a biogenesis matrix, a seed bank of near-extinct Terran life, the very building blocks of a future, and he was to divide them. He was to lay them out in 2 parallel rows within the ship's primary engineering bay, creating a path between the fundamental elements of their survival. It was an act of profound, seemingly suicidal faith. To dismantle their future in order to secure it. The log described Kalen's obedience, his hands methodically splitting the priceless, irreplaceable technology. As the final component was set in place, a deep stasis field enveloped him, not from the ship's systems, but from an external, unknown source. He was conscious, yet unable to move, a helpless observer. And then he came. Ilara leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat as the log's visual sensors tried to render the impossible. It began as a pinpoint of light at one end of the corridor, a light that defied physics. It was not the harsh glare of a plasma torch or the cool light of a star. It was a presence, a living, terrifying, glorious light. The light expanded, coalescing into a form that was both a pillar of fire and a river of liquid starlight. A sound filled the chamber, a resonance that Ilara felt in her very bones. Even across the chasm of Centurisa, sound that was both a symphony of creation and the scream of a star being born. This was the essence of the architect. Slowly, deliberately, the river of fire, the presence of the architect, began to move. It flowed down the path Kalen had made, passing between the bisected components of their future. It passed between the 2 halves of the ship's core, between the severed seed banks, between the divided plates of the hull. According to the ancient rites of covenant-making, both parties were meant to walk that path, signifying a mutual promise. If I break this pact, may I be torn asunder like these things. But Kalen remained frozen in stasis. He did not walk the path. He couldn't. Only the architect passed through. The implication crashed down upon Ilara with the force of a physical blow. It was a one-sided oath, a unilateral promise. The architect was symbolically declaring, if this covenant is ever broken, let the consequence of that failure fall upon me and me alone. The responsibility for its fulfillment is mine, regardless of your faithfulness, regardless of your doubt, regardless of your failure. The vision ended. Kalen was released from his stasis, falling to his knees, weeping in the sudden, profound silence of the engineering bay. He was weeping not in fear, but in overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. Ilara switched off the archive log. The soft light vanished, plunging the vault back into its dim, functional glow. The hum of the failing life support was still there. The threat from Jax and the Council was still real. The ship was still dying. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she understood. The Covenant's strength wasn't a chain binding the remnant to the architect. It was a chain the architect had bound to himself. It wasn't built on their ability to endure the journey. It was built on the character of the one who had promised the destination. It was unbreakable not because they were strong, but because he had taken all the responsibility for their weakness upon himself. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, but of a fragile, terrifying, and defiant hope. Ilara walked out of the archives and into the cold, metallic reality of the Starseeker. The revelation from Kalen's log was a fire in her soul, but the ship's groaning corridors and the flickering emergency lights were a bucket of ice water. Hope was a fragile ember, and the wind of reality was howling. She made her way to the observation deck, the one place where the void was not just an abstract threat, but a visible, overwhelming presence. Stars burned like diamond dust scattered on black velvet, indifferent to the tiny, struggling civilization encased in metal and faith. The summons for the council meeting arrived, a stark, formal chime on her wristcom. It was time. Taking one last look at the distant, swirling nebula that marked the general direction of Aethel, she turned her back on the stars and walked towards the heart of the ship's government. The council chamber was a sterile, circular room dominated by a large holographic display table. The leaders of the major sectors were present, their faces grim holograms floating above their designated seats. Jax stood at the center, his presence solid and real. He had the floor. The data is unequivocal, he was saying, gesturing to a cascading series of terrifying graphs and decay rate projections on the display. At current consumption rates, the primary water reclamation system will suffer catastrophic failure in less than 3 cycles. The fusion core's containment field is fluctuating by 12% beyond acceptable parameters. We are adrift on a sea of statistics, and every single one is pointing towards our end. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. The Alcyone Nebula offers a solution, a tangible one: water, fuel, survival. It is a deviation from the path, I know, but the path is leading us to our graves. The covenant, as Ilara so faithfully maintains, was a promise of life, of a great nation. How can we be a nation if we allow ourselves to perish out of stubborn adherence to an ancient map? The architect has been silent. We must be our own salvation. A murmur of assent rippled through the council members. He was logical. He was practical. He offered a plan that didn't rely on hope, but on action. Ilara felt the fragile ember in her soul flicker and dim. "There is another way," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the tense chamber. All heads turned to her. Jax's expression hardened. "Keeper Ilara, we have heard your sermons on faith. We are now discussing engineering and survival." "Isvilling, the two are intertwined, Engineer Jax," she replied, stepping forward. "More than you know." She looked at the council, at the tired, frightened faces of her people's leaders. "The covenant is not a destination on a map. It is a declaration of the architect's character. We have forgotten that. We look at our failing ship and see proof that we have been abandoned. But I ask you to look at it differently." She walked towards the central display, her dark keeper's robes sweeping the floor. With a few keystrokes on her comm, she pulled up a different set of data, the ship's original design schematics from the Terra archives, alongside the current, failing diagnostics Jax had shown. This vessel, the Starseeker, is a relic. It was built with the technology of our ancestors 4 centuries ago. According to every simulation, every law of thermodynamics and material science we understand, it should have failed 150 cycles ago. The constant stress of the fusion core, the micrometeoroid impacts, the relentless entropy of the void, we should not exist. We should be a cloud of frozen dust in the interstellar medium. Jax scoffed. "A testament to the skill of the first engineers. Nothing more." "No," Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. "It is a testament to the faithfulness of the architect. You read the decay, but have you ever read the miracle? Have you ever asked why a machine this old, under this much strain, hasn't simply disintegrated? The covenant is unbreakable because the one who made it is unchanging and faithful. He promised Kalan that his descendants would not be consumed by the void, and he has kept that promise. This ship, our continued existence, is the proof." Her words hung in the air, a beautiful but unsubstantiated theory. Jax seized the opening. "Proof? I see rust, malfunctions, and imminent failure. You see a miracle. You are asking us to bet 300,000 lives on a poetic interpretation of maintenance logs. Then let us find more than poetry," Ilara challenged, her eyes locking with his. She pointed to the heart of the schematic, the fusion core's primary regulatory matrix. "The core is the source of our decay, but it is also the source of the miracle. I believe the architect left more than a promise. I believe he left a signature, an immutable piece of code embedded deep within the core's operating system, something that doesn't just run the system, but actively sustains it in ways we can't comprehend. An anti-entropic sequence that constantly, subtly, repairs and reinforces the ship on a subatomic level. It is his faithfulness written in the language of physics." The council was stunned into silence. This was heresy of a different kind, blending the sacred texts with engineering speculation. Jax's face was a mask of incredulous anger. "That is impossible. The core matrix is a closed system. No one has accessed it since the launch. A direct diagnostic is incredibly dangerous. A single error could destabilize the containment field. You are proposing we risk immediate annihilation on the basis of a folktale you found in the archives." "I am proposing we find the truth," Ilara countered, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. If I am wrong, then you have proven your point, and we can chart a new course to Alcyone with a clear conscience. But if I am right, if we find that signature, it changes everything. It means we are not alone. It means the path is real, and the promise is being actively upheld, even now. It means our hope is not blind. Her gaze swept across the holograms of the council members. She saw their fear, but she also saw a flicker of something else, a desperate yearning for her to be right. The elder from the agricultural sector, a woman named Lyra, spoke first. "What would it take, Keeper?" "I need access to the core chamber," Ilara said, looking directly at Jax. "I need you. Your engineering knowledge is the only thing that can navigate the system safely. Together, we run the diagnostic. We look for the signature." Jax stared at her, his mind warring between his rigid pragmatism and the sheer, magnificent audacity of her claim. To disprove her, he had to help her. It was a perfect trap. A long, tense moment passed. The low hum of the ship seemed to grow louder, counting down the seconds to their future. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. "One rotation," he said, his voice clipped. "You get one chance to find your ghost in the machine, Keeper, and when you fail, the Council will vote, and we will set a course for the Alcyone Nebula. Agreed?" "Agreed," Ilara said, her heart pounding. The meeting was adjourned. The holograms vanished, leaving only Ilara and Jax standing in the silent chamber. The space between them crackled with unspoken tension. They were no longer just a historian and an engineer. They were champions of two opposing faiths, one in the seen, the other in the unseen, and they were about to walk into the fiery heart of their world to see which one was true. The path to the core chamber was a descent into the deepest, oldest part of the Star Seeker. The polished corridors of the upper decks gave way to raw, unpainted durasteel, then to heavy-gauge plating weeping with condensation. The air grew thick and hot, humming with the contained power of the star they had caged. Ilara followed Jax, his broad back a testament to the heavy responsibility he carried. He was silent, his movements efficient and precise, a man entirely in his element. Ilara, in her flowing keeper's robes, felt like a spectre in this industrial sanctuary. They reached a final blast door, emblazoned with a dozen warning sigils. "Beyond this point, standard comms are useless," Jax stated, not looking at her. "The electromagnetic field from the core will fry any unsecured electronics. We'll be on a closed, hardline comms link only. And our environment suits are shielded, but only rated for 60 minutes of close proximity. After that, the radiation dose becomes critical. Do you understand?" "I understand," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She sealed the helmet of her bulky environment suit, the world outside her visor suddenly muffled and distant. The door hissed open, revealing a sight that stole her breath. The core chamber was a vast, spherical cavern. In its center, suspended by colossal magnetic containment rings, floated the fusion core. It was not a machine of metal and wires, but a miniature sun, a swirling incandescent ball of plasma blue, violet and gold writhing in a silent, violent dance. Walkways of reinforced glass snaked around it, leading to a single diagnostic terminal perched precariously close to the blinding energy. The hum she had felt throughout the ship was a deafening, soul-shaking roar here, a sound felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. "This is it," Jax's voice crackled through her helmet's comm. "The heart of the Star Seeker, the source of all our problems, and, you believe, all our solutions." There was a note of grudging awe in his voice. No matter how many times he saw it, the sheer power was overwhelming. They walked out onto the gantry, the heat pressing in on them even through the shielded suits. Below them, the plasma swirled, a chaotic god in a cage. Ilara felt a primal fear, the kind her ancestors must have felt before a thunderstorm or a volcanic eruption. "The terminal," Jax pointed. "It's the only direct interface, built for the original diagnostics before the launch. No one's used it since." They reached the console, its screen dark and dead. Jax knelt, his gloved fingers flying as he pried open a service panel and began rerouting power. Sparks flew, dangerously close to his faceplate. Ilara watched, realizing the immense risk he was taking. This wasn't just about disproving her, this was about the safety of his ship, his people. He was a man of honor, even in his skepticism. Power is online, he grunted, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow that instantly evaporated in the heat. The ancient screen flickered to life, displaying lines of archaic code, the core's base operating language. Now for your theory, Keeper. What are we looking for? A code that doesn't belong, Elara said, moving closer. She peered at the cascade of symbols. The architect's signature wouldn't be part of the operational code. That would be too easy to find, too easy to alter. It would be deeper, woven into the very fabric of the system's foundational logic. Not a program, but a law, a fundamental constant. Jax looked at her, his skepticism warring with his engineer's curiosity. A new physical law embedded in code? That's elegant, I'll give you that. But it's impossible. Is it? Elara countered. The one who created the stars can surely write a new line of code for a starship's engine. She pointed to a subroutine that was constantly running, a diagnostic loop that monitored the containment field's integrity. There, that loop. It's standard, but look at the error correction data. The system is reporting thousands of micro-fluctuations every second, far more than the design should be able to handle. Yet the field holds. It constantly stabilizes itself. You said it yourself, Jax. The fluctuations are 12% beyond parameters. Why hasn't it failed? Jax leaned in, his own expertise now fully engaged. He saw it too. The raw data showed chaos, a system on the verge of collapse, but the output, the reality, was stability. It was like watching a man get shot 1,000 times a second but never bleed. The correction algorithms, they're compensating, he murmured, his voice laced with disbelief. But they aren't efficient enough. They shouldn't be. The energy cost to perform this many corrections would drain the core. Unless the energy isn't coming from the core, Elara whispered, the truth dawning on her like the light of the star before them. Run a diagnostic on the correction algorithm itself. Trace its source logic. Where does the command originate? Jax's fingers, no longer hesitant, danced across the console. He was a surgeon now, cutting deep into the system's heart. Lines of code flew across the screen, a dizzying waterfall of information. He bypassed layers of security protocols, burrowing deeper than any engineer had gone in 400 cycles. The heat from the core intensified, a warning. The 60-minute clock was ticking. I'm hitting a wall, he said, frustrated. A block of code that is unreadable. It's not encrypted in any language I recognize. It's not even a language. It looks like a fractal, infinitely complex. That's it, Elara breathed. That has to be it. Don't try to read it. Look at its function. What does it do? Jax reconfigured the diagnostic, shifting from analysis to observation. He tracked the data flow. The chaotic input from the core's fluctuations went into the unreadable block of code. And what came out was a stream of perfectly ordered stabilizing commands. It was a black box that consumed chaos and produced order. It violates the second law of thermodynamics, Jax stammered, his scientific mind reeling. It's decreasing entropy on a closed system. That's not possible. It is, if the system isn't truly closed, Elara said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It is if it's being sustained by a power from outside. And then they saw it. At the very heart of the fractal code, at the origin point from which all the stabilizing commands flowed, was a single, immutable symbol. It wasn't alphanumeric. It wasn't a sigil of any known culture. It was a searing, simple, and infinitely complex sigil of light burned into the logic of the machine. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic luminescence in perfect time with the thrumming of the core. It was a signature, a maker's mark, the architect's signature. Jax stared, all his skepticism, all his logic, all his certainty shattering like glass. He reached out a trembling, gloved finger and traced the symbol on the screen. It was real. It was there. The miracle wasn't a matter of faith anymore. It was a line of code. The ship wasn't surviving by luck. It was being actively, miraculously held together. I don't understand, he whispered, his voice cracking over the comm. You don't have to, Elara said, tears welling in her eyes, fogging the inside of her visor. You just have to believe it. He never left. He has been here, holding us together, every single moment of this journey. A klaxon blared through the chamber, a harsh, panicked sound. A red light flashed on their suit displays. Warning, containment field instability. Evacuate immediately. The discovery had come at a price. Their deep dive into the system had temporarily disrupted the very miracle they had just found. The core, the caged sun before them, began to writhe more violently, its golden light shifting to an angry, malevolent red. The unbreakable covenant was real, but at that moment it felt like it was about to make them its first martyrs. The klaxon was a scream that tore through the awe of their discovery. The incandescent sphere of plasma before them warped, its surface erupting in solar flares of furious crimson. The reinforced glass walkway beneath their feet vibrated violently, threatening to shatter. "What's happening?" Elara yelled over the alarms, her hands flying to the console as if she could physically hold it together. "The diagnostic probe," Jax roared, already in motion. "We bypassed too many safeties. The signature's stabilizing effect is disrupted. It's like we poked a sleeping giant. We have to disengage the probe and restore the primary sequence. Now." He lunged for the console, but a shower of sparks erupted from the panel he'd opened earlier, sending him staggering back. The screen went dark. The diagnostic terminal was dead. They were cut off. "The manual override!" Jax shouted, pointing to a heavy, shielded lever near the containment ring's main power conduit. It was a relic of last resort engineering, a brutal physical switch designed to sever all external connections and force the core into a standard, non-adaptive state. It's the only way to reset the system. But the conduit is arcing. The EM field will be lethal. Elara saw it. Blue lightning, raw and untamed, was now leaping from the main conduit to the gantry's railing. The path to the override lever was an impassable wall of energy. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped her. They had found their proof, only to be executed by it. "Our suits won't protect us from a direct hit," Jax stated, the grim finality in his voice chilling Elara to the bone. "We're trapped." They were two souls standing on a precipice, staring into the face of their own son, God's wrath. The ship groaned around them, a wounded beast. Red alert lights began to strobe throughout the chamber, casting their faces in a hellish glow. Elara thought of the 300,000 people above them, oblivious, sleeping in their bunks or working their shifts, their lives dependent on this failing, furious heart. This was it, the moment of failure, the moment the covenant broke. But Kaelin's log flashed in her mind. Only the architect passed through. The promise wasn't contingent on their success, it was contingent on his character. And what was that character? It was the character of a being who took the full responsibility of failure upon himself. A new thought, terrifying and divine, pierced through Elara's fear. It was not just a historical event, it was an ongoing principle. The architect didn't just bear the penalty for breaking the covenant in some abstract symbolic way. He bore the penalty for their failures, here and now. Jax was frantically trying to shield his face from the intense heat, looking for any other option, any escape. But Elara looked at the arcing electricity, at the override lever, and then at the swirling chaos of the core. She saw not just a system failure, but a reflection of her people's entire journey. For generations they had been unfaithful, they had doubted, they had rebelled, they had demanded proof, and now in this chamber, she and Jax had done the same. They had poked and prodded at the miracle, refusing to simply trust in it, demanding it reveal itself on their terms. This catastrophic failure was the direct result of their own lack of faith. It was their fault. According to the laws of justice, they should pay the price. The covenant was a two-way relationship after all, even if its ultimate security was one-sided. There were blessings for obedience and consequences for disobedience. This was the consequence. "Jax," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with a strange calm. "The Gethsemane Protocol." Jax froze, turning to stare at her. The Gethsemane Protocol was not an engineering procedure. It was a theological one, buried deep in the archives, considered by most to be a myth or a parable. It was a rite of intercession, drawn from the darkest moments of Kaelin's logs, when he offered to take the punishment for his people's sins upon himself. The protocol was a plea for the shepherd to pay the ransom for the sheep. "You're insane," Jax breathed, his face pale behind his visor. "That's a prayer, Ilara, not a plan." "It's both," she insisted, her conviction a shield against the chaos. "The covenant has terms, blessings and curses. This is the curse. We brought it on ourselves by our doubt, by demanding a sign. It's just. But the covenant also has a redeemer. The architect who walked the path alone also promised to be our shepherd. He takes the consequence, so we don't have to." Without waiting for his response, Ilara closed her eyes. She ignored the screeching alarms, the vibrating floor, the searing heat. She turned her mind inward, away from the roaring failure of the machine, and towards the silent, immutable signature they had found. She focused on the presence it represented. "Architect," she whispered, her voice a fragile prayer in the heart of the storm. "We are the unfaithful. We are the doubting. This failure is ours. The consequence is just. But we appeal to the heart of your covenant, the one you sealed alone. Be our shepherd. Pay the ransom. Let the cost of our failure fall on you, not on your people, not on us." As she spoke, Jax watched in stunned disbelief. But then he saw it. The arcing electricity from the main conduit did not lessen, but it changed. It ceased its wild, random flashes. The tendrils of blue lightning seemed to gain focus, to gather themselves. Instead of lashing out at the gantry, they began to flow, to coalesce into a single brilliant stream of energy, and that stream was flowing impossibly into the fusion core itself. The system wasn't just discharging energy, it was absorbing it. It was taking the raw, destructive power of the overload and feeding it back into its heart. The angry red of the core began to soften, swirling with the incoming streams of blue. The violent shudders lessened. Jack stared at his suit's radiation meter. The levels, which had been spiking into the lethal range, were dropping rapidly. The raw energy that should have been frying them, tearing the chamber apart, was being drawn away, as if by an unseen magnet. It's taking the hit," Jack stammered, his voice filled with an awe that dwarfed what he'd felt upon first seeing the core. "It's taking the damage itself." The final arc of lightning flared, a brilliant, blinding flash that illuminated the entire chamber, and then vanished. Silence. The klaxons cut off. The red alert lights faded, replaced by the steady, calm, blue-white glow of a stable system. The roar of the core subsided back to its familiar, life-giving hum. Ilara opened her eyes, gasping for breath, the prayer having taken a physical toll on her. She and Jack stood in the sudden, peaceful silence, the only sound their own ragged breathing. The gantry was scorched where the lightning had been, a stark reminder of the death they had just evaded. She looked at the core. It was stable, more stable than before. And on the reactivated console screen, a single line of text had appeared, written in the same archaic code as the operating system, but glowing with the light of the signature. "Debt paid. Covenant affirmed." Jack sank to his knees, his pragmatic, scientific worldview completely and utterly undone. He wasn't looking at a machine anymore. He was looking at his savior. He finally understood. The covenant wasn't just about a destination or a promise of survival. It was about a relationship with a being who didn't just point the way, but who would step in front of lightning to save his people from their own foolishness. The price for their doubt had been paid not by them, but for them. "He is faithful," Jax whispered. The words not a concession, but a confession, even when we are not. The ascent from the core chamber was a silent, solemn pilgrimage. The heat and the roar faded behind them, replaced by the cool, humming corridors of the upper decks. Jax walked beside Ilara, the arrogant certainty gone from his stride, replaced by a quiet, contemplative reverence. He had gone down into the heart of the ship a man of science. He had come back a man of faith. The world was the same, but his eyes were new. Word of their survival had preceded them. As they emerged from the final access tunnel, they were met not by an empty corridor, but by the entire council, their holographic forms replaced by their physical presence. They stood waiting, their faces a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Elder Lyra stepped forward, her gaze searching Jax's face. "Engineer, what happened?" The ship-wide systems reported a power surge that nearly initiated a full shutdown, followed by inexplicable stability. Jax looked at Ilara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then he turned to the council. His voice, when he spoke, was different. The sharp, argumentative edge was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant gravity. "We found it," he said simply. "The Keeper was right. There is a signature in the core's matrix, an active, sustaining presence. We are not alone. We have never been alone." He then recounted the events in the chamber, his engineer's precision lending a terrifying credibility to the miraculous story. He described the unreadable code, the violation of thermodynamics, the sudden, violent destabilization caused by their probe. And then he told them of the Gethsemane protocol. He described the lightning, the imminent destruction, and how the core had absorbed the overload, taking the hit for them. His voice faltered as he recited the 2 lines of text that had appeared on the screen: "Debt paid, covenant affirmed." The council was speechless. They looked from Jax, their champion of pragmatism, to Ilara, the quiet keeper. His testimony was more powerful than any sermon she could have preached. It was the confession of a convert, a Damascus Road experience in the heart of a fusion reactor. "The detour to the Alcyone Nebula is no longer necessary," Jax concluded, his eyes meeting each council member's gaze. "It is no longer an option. It would be an act of profound faithlessness. Our path is clear. We stay the course for Ethel." The vote was a formality. One by one, the council members voiced their assent, their voices filled with a new, fragile hope. The immediate crisis was over. The ship was stable, its heart beating stronger than ever. But Ilara knew the true challenge was just beginning. The miracle in the core had saved their lives, but it had not solved their deepest problem, the flawed, fearful nature of the human heart. In the cycles that followed, a wave of revival swept through the Starseeker. The story of the core chamber spread like wildfire, from the hydroponic farms to the engineering decks. For the first time in generations, the Covenant was not just a story from the archives, it was a living, breathing reality. Attendance at the remembrance ceremonies swelled. The name of the architect was spoken with reverence, not as a distant myth, but as a present and active protector. Yet a new problem began to emerge. Subtle and insidious. The miracle had created a new kind of legalism. People became obsessed with the correct way to honor the architect. Factions arose. Some believed that rigorous adherence to the ancient Terran purification rituals was the only way to show gratitude. Others argued that service and communal labor were the truest forms of worship. Debates turned into arguments, arguments into bitter divisions. They had been saved from the curse of faithlessness only to fall into the trap of self-righteousness. They were trying to earn the grace they had been freely given. Ilara saw the pattern with a sinking heart. It was the story of her people, repeated endlessly. They had been given a promise, the covenant of Kalan, and they had failed. They had been given a set of laws to guide them, the ancient behavioral codes from the first exiles, and they had failed to keep them. Now, they had been given a miracle, and they were turning it into a new, impossible law. One evening, a distraught elder Lyra came to the archives. Ilara, the agricultural sector, is divided. One group refuses to use the nutrient recyclers because they believe it's impure. They are insisting on using only the original seed bank stock, but that will deplete our reserves. Another group claims the architect has blessed the recyclers and that the others are heretics. They came to blows this morning over a fertilizer shipment. We were saved from destruction only to tear ourselves apart. Ilara listened, her heart aching. The problem wasn't the ship's hardware anymore. It was their own internal wiring. That night, she returned to the Prime Archive, but this time she didn't search for Kalan's log. She searched for the prophecies that came after, the ones that spoke of a future hope. She found the words of the seer Jeremiah, recorded just before the last exodus from a dying lunar colony centuries ago. The seer's synthesized voice filled the vault, speaking of a time of failure and exile, a time when the people would prove themselves utterly incapable of upholding their end of the bargain. But then, the prophecy shifted. "Behold, the days are coming," declares the architect, "when I will make a new covenant with the house of the remnant. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefather Kalan, a covenant they broke, though I was a husband to them. But this is the covenant I will make. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their architect, and they shall be my people. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." The words washed over Ilara, another piece of the divine puzzle falling into place. The architect knew. He knew from the very beginning that they would fail. He knew the covenant of Canaan, secured by his own faithfulness, was not enough to change their hearts. He knew that external laws and even spectacular miracles would ultimately fail to transform them. The solution wasn't a better ship or a clearer set of rules. The solution was a new heart. The prophecy spoke of a new covenant, one where the law was not written on crystal slates in an archive, but inscribed directly onto the human soul. A covenant where obedience would flow not from fear or a desire to earn favor, but from an internal fundamental change of character, a transformation initiated by the architect himself. Ilara looked at the state of her people, their petty squabbles and self-righteous factions. They were trying to follow an external law, but their hearts were still the same. They needed the new covenant that Jeremiah had prophesied. They needed the law written on their hearts. But how? How could such a thing be possible? The prophecy was beautiful, but it gave no mechanism, no pathway to its fulfillment. It was another promise, seemingly as distant as the star Ethel itself. As she pondered this, her console chimed. It was a message from Jax, flagged with the highest priority. It was a single image, sent without comment. It was a deep space sensor reading from the forward observation array, a long-range scan of the star system. They were approaching the Ethel system. The image showed the sun, a brilliant G-type star. It showed the third planet, a blue and white marble of oceans and clouds. But it also showed something else, something the ancient star charts had never depicted. In high orbit around the promised world of Ethel was a structure. It was vast, cruciform in shape, and emanating a strange, hybrid energy signature that was both technological and something more. It was a beacon, a station, a gateway. And at its very center, the sensors detected a single living being, waiting. The image of the cruciform station hung in the air of the council chamber like a verdict. It was silent, impossible, and utterly real. For days, the star, Seeker's most powerful sensors, had been focused on the Ethel system, and the data was irrefutable. A structure of unknown design and immense size was waiting for them, a silent sentinel at the threshold of their promised home. And at its heart, the bioscans, faint but persistent, registered a single life form. Panic, the old familiar enemy, began to creep back into the ship's corridors. Who was this being? An agent of the architect, or something else entirely? A final test, a guardian, or a threat? The factions that had argued over rituals now found a new source of division. Some preached that the being was a welcoming herald, a final guide. Others, led by a charismatic and fearful man named Malachi, proclaimed it was the great deceiver, a trap set at the end of their journey to lure them to their doom. "It is a test of our purity," Malachi thundered in the central plaza, his voice echoing off the metallic walls. "The architect has brought us this far, but we must prove we are worthy to enter his sanctuary. We must reject this emissary. To commune with it is to defile ourselves before we even set foot on holy ground." His words resonated with the fear-fatigued populace. The self-righteous legalism Ilara had worried about now had a focal point. They began to see the covenant not as a promise of grace, but as a final brutal exam they were about to fail. Ilara and Jax stood on the observation deck, watching the distant light of the Ethel sun grow brighter. The station was still just a pinpoint of light to the naked eye, but they knew what it represented. "He's tearing them apart," Jax said, his voice heavy with frustration. "Malachi is using their fear, turning the architect's covenant into a weapon against them. He's making them believe their salvation depends on their own perfection, their own ability to reject this threat. Because that is easier than grace," Ilara said softly. "It is easier to believe you can earn your place, that you have some control. True grace is terrifying. It means admitting you have no control at all, that you are utterly dependent." She looked at the distant star, this being, this emissary. He is the key to the new covenant Jeremiah spoke of. How can you know that? Jax asked, his newfound faith still wrestling with the need for evidence. Because the old way isn't working, Ilara replied, gesturing back towards the heart of the ship where the factions were arguing. Look at us, we have seen the miracle in the core. We have felt the architect's direct intervention, and still we are fractured, we are proud, we are afraid, our hearts are unchanged. The law, even when we know it's true, is powerless to make us good. We need a new way, and that is why he is there. A plan began to form in her mind, a plan as audacious as her descent into the court chamber. We have to talk to him. The proposal was met with outrage in the council. Malachi, now a council member himself, due to his popularity, was apoplectic. This is madness, a reckless gamble with 300,000 souls. We must bypass the station, approach Aethel from the far side, and prove our loyalty by our obedience. Obedience to what? To fear. Jax countered, his voice booming with the conviction of a changed man. The architect has guided us here, to this exact point in space and time. Do you truly believe this station is a surprise to him? It is not an obstacle. It is an appointment. Ilara then spoke, her voice cutting through the clamor. The covenant of Kaelan was made with one man representing all of us. The law was given to a generation representing all of us. The miracle in the core was witnessed by two, representing all of us. The architect has always worked through representatives, through mediators. We cannot approach Aethel as a fearful, fractured mob. We must send an envoy, one person to stand in our place, to hear the words of this emissary, and to bring back the message, to act as our mediator. The logic was undeniable, echoing the patterns of their own history. The question then became, who? Malachi immediately nominated himself, claiming he was the only one pure enough to resist the deceiver's wiles. But Ilara looked at the council, her gaze firm. It cannot be someone who believes they are worthy, she said, her words a gentle rebuke to Malachi. It must be someone who knows they are not. It must be someone who understands our failure, our weakness, and our desperate need for the grace promised in the new covenant. It must be someone who represents not our strength, but our brokenness. Her eyes rested on Jax. It must be you, Jax. A stunned silence fell. Jax looked at her, his eyes wide. Me, I was the greatest skeptic of all. I championed the path of rebellion. Exactly, Ilara said. You represent every one of us who has doubted, who has demanded proof, who has turned away. But you also represent the one who has seen the truth and been changed by it. You are the perfect envoy for a people in need of a new heart. You will not go in your own strength, but in the name of the people, carrying all our brokenness with you. The council, swayed by the profound truth in her words, agreed. Malachi fumed in silent fury, his plan to seize control thwarted. A single shuttle, the Pilgrim, was prepared. It was small, unarmed, stripped of everything but a life support system and a long-range comms unit. As Jax prepared to board, wearing a simple grey jumpsuit, Ilara met him at the airlock. I am afraid, he confessed, his voice low. I know, she said, placing a data slate in his hand. It was the prophecy of Jeremiah. Remember what you are going for. Not to negotiate, not to prove our worth. You are going to receive a promise. The promise of a new heart. Jax nodded, his hand closing around the slate. He entered the shuttle, the hatch sealing behind him. From the observation deck, Ilara and the rest of the Star, Seeker's Command watched as the tiny vessel detached and began its journey across the final expanse of darkness, a single, fragile question mark flying towards a colossal, silent answer. The journey took 3 days. For 3 days, the Starseeker was a ship holding its breath. They watched the Pilgrim's telemetry, a tiny spark of light closing the distance to the great cruciform station. As the shuttle approached, the station, which had been inert, came to life. Panels of light glowed along its arms, and a docking bay, perfectly sized for the Pilgrim, opened at its center, bathing the shuttle in a soft, welcoming light. There was no threat, only invitation. Jax's voice, crackling with static and awe, came over the comms. I'm docked. The atmosphere is breathable. It's perfect. I'm going out. The ship's main view screen switched to the Pilgrim's external camera. It showed Jax stepping out of the airlock and into a vast, silent hangar. The air was filled with a soft golden light, and the silence was not empty, but full of peace. In the center of the hangar, standing with his back to the camera, was a figure. He was humanoid, robed in simple white cloth. As Jax took a hesitant step forward, the figure turned. His face was kind, etched with a sorrow and a wisdom that seemed older than the stars. But that was not what made the entire bridge crew of the Starseeker gasp in unison. It was his hands. Piercing through the back of each hand was a wound, not bleeding, but glowing with the soft, internal light of the architect's signature. They were the marks of a great violence, a terrible price paid. The emissary took a step towards Jax. "I am Jeshua," he said, his voice resonating not just through the comms, but in the hearts of everyone listening. "I am the mediator of the new covenant. Welcome, Jax of the Remnant. I have been waiting for you." On the bridge of the Starseeker, a sacred hush had fallen. 300,000 souls, linked by comms and view screens, watched as their representative stood before the nail-scarred emissary. Malachi, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, could only stare as the scene unfolded, his narrative of a great deceiver crumbling into dust before this image of gentle, wounded authority. "You are the fulfillment of the prophecy?" Jax stammered, his gaze fixed on the glowing wounds in Jeshua's hands. The data slate containing Jeremiah's words felt heavy and inadequate in his grip. "I am," Jeshua said, his smile radiating a warmth that crossed the void. The architect, in his infinite love, knew that a covenant written on stone or data slates could only ever reveal your brokenness. It could show you the standard, but it could not give you the power to meet it. It was a mirror, showing you the flaw in your own hearts. A new way was needed. He beckoned Jax to walk with him, and the shuttle's camera followed as they moved from the hangar into a great hall at the station center. The hall was not made of metal and circuits, but seemed to be composed of living light. In its center was a pool of shimmering liquid energy that swirled with the same blue, violet, and gold as the star, Seeker's core. "You saw the architect's signature in your ship's heart," Jeshua continued, gesturing to the pool. "A constant, sustaining power that held you together despite your mechanical decay. It was a shadow of this reality. What the architect does for your ship, I have come to do for your souls." He turned to face Jax, his eyes filled with a profound and personal compassion. "Your people are fractured, Jax. They strive for righteousness through rituals and rules. They fear punishment. They hope for reward. They are trying to build a bridge to the architect out of their own deeds, but the chasm is too wide. The new covenant is not a bridge you build, it is a bridge he has built to you, and I am that bridge." He extended his scarred hands. "This is the price of the new covenant. Your people violated the old one. Justice demanded a penalty. A life for a life. The Gethsemane protocol you invoked was a cry of faith that pointed to this truth. The architect in his mercy answered your prayer by placing the consequence not on you but on me. I am the kinsman redeemer. I am the ransom. I have taken the curse of your broken covenants into myself so that you might receive the blessing of an unbreakable one." The full weight of the truth crashed down on Jax. The Genesis forge, where the architect walked the path alone. The miracle in the core, absorbing the overload. It was all one continuous story, culminating in this moment, in this person. The wounds in Jeshua's hands were the final, ultimate answer to the question that had haunted Ilara, and now him. What makes the covenant unbreakable? It's unbreakable because he absorbed the break. Tears streamed down Jax's face. He fell to his knees, not in fear, but in overwhelming gratitude. "What must we do?" he wept. "What must our people do to receive this?" "You can do nothing to earn it," Jeshua said, gently raising him to his feet. "You must simply receive it. Cease your striving. Abandon the belief that your own purity can save you. Accept the gift. Accept my sacrifice as the payment for your failure. Let me write the architect's law on your heart, not a law of do and do not, but a law of love. Love for him and love for one another. This is the law that fulfills all others." He dipped his hand into the pool of living light. It clung to his fingers like liquid starlight. "This is the seal of the new covenant. It is the spirit of the architect himself." It is not an external force holding you together anymore. It will be an internal presence, transforming you from the inside out. It will make you want to do what is right. It will heal your divisions. It will cast out your fear. It will make you a new people. He reached out and gently touched Jax's forehead. A wave of warmth, peace, and overwhelming love flooded Jax's entire being. It was the feeling of being known completely and loved unconditionally. The constant, low-grade fear that had been his companion for his entire life simply dissolved. In its place was a quiet, unshakable joy. "Go back," Jeshua said, his voice a gentle command. "Tell them what you have seen. Tell them the mediator has come. The way to Athel is open. The way to the architect is open. The only price of admission is to lay down your pride and accept the free gift of grace." Back on the Starseeker, they had watched it all. They had heard every word. When the light faded from Jax's forehead and he stood there, transformed, a collective sigh of relief and wonder went through the ship. Malachi had slumped in his chair, defeated, his ideology of fear rendered powerless by the reality of grace. Ilara stood on the bridge, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She finally had her complete answer. The covenant was unbreakable for three ultimate reasons. First, it was established unilaterally by the architect, who took full responsibility for its success from the beginning. Second, it was upheld by the immutable character of the architect, whose faithfulness sustained them even when their technology and their own faith failed. And third, it was ultimately fulfilled and sealed by a mediator, Jeshua, who personally paid the penalty for their unfaithfulness, satisfying the demands of justice and opening the way for a new covenant tone that changed their very hearts. It was never about them. It was always about him. Jax returned to the Starseeker not as an engineer or an envoy, but as the first citizen of a new creation. He told his story, and the effect was profound. The factions dissolved, not by force, but by the dawning realization that their rituals and rules were meaningless compared to the grace being offered. They laid down their pride and their fear, and a spirit of unity and love, the likes of which had not been seen since they left Terra, swept through the ship. They were no longer the remnant. They were the redeemed. Together, as one people with one heart, they piloted the Starseeker past the cruciform station, which glowed in silent blessing. They made their final approach to the blue and white marble of Athel, their promised home. As the first shuttles descended through the clouds, carrying a people transformed not by their own efforts but by a love that paid the ultimate price, Ilara stood in the archives, looking at the prime archive slate of Kylan. The question that had started her journey now had its final resounding answer. What in the architect's covenant with the remnant made it truly unbreakable? Hadid,